Well, I think I've never changed my course in the sense that I believe those assets are really a chess war to some extent in the peace negotiations. So, according to the international law, I mean, clearly there is a sovereign immunity which is kicking in here. And that's also why in the context of reparation law, we were quite, willing to make sure that the rule of law continue to be respected. And so I continue to believe that this is really, an argument in any peace negotiation.
Isn't this just a European perspective again? Because if you look at what Trump has done in Venezuela, sweeping and taking control of the country, seizing the assets and then distributing the proceeds of those assets, some to the States, some to Venezuela. Why is that not how Europe is contending with these frozen assets?
Well, first of all, there is not really a frozen assets, there is frozen liabilities because there is a right of restitution that Central Bank of Russia has, and then the securities which redeem and became cash on the balance sheet of Euroclear. So I think one thing also very often the people forget, there is no free assets which are sitting somewhere to be used, If there is a use of the frozen assets, there should be somebody taking up also the frozen liabilities, because those are really what really started, if you wish. Second thing, I think, since also over the discussion on the reparation loan, the US has also been very adamant that there is a respect of the sovereign immunity and that those assets are used in negotiation talks. So I think on that one, I believe we are pretty aligned.
Let me just zoom out to the sentiment here as we progress through the World Economic Forum, because we're now talking about tariff threats between the US and Europe. Two allies here in an escalating tariff threat if Trump is not given Greenland through negotiations. What do you make of what they could do for sentiment here in Europe?
Well, I think it's true that the sentiment is worsening. There is a little bit of feeling of betrayal. But at the same time, I'm a private company, so I'm not a political, institution. And of course, we are closely watching what is happening because at the same time, the trade flows and investment flows between Europe and the US have always been extremely important. So yes, we are watching the situation. Now, another thing also that we need to recognize is that already last year, some of the statements of Mr. Trump has led also to a wake-up call in Europe with the Savings and Investment Union. So to some extent, I think it's good to have Europe coming back as well from a competitiveness perspective and from a sovereignty perspective. So of course, as a European, I think it's important, but I'm always, very much in favor of collaboration and cross-border movements between the two companies or the two countries. Sorry.
This revival of European competitiveness story is having consequences, though, for particular companies and for particular sectors, because it does mean consolidation. And in your sector, if we look at the ambitions now of Euronext, very much emboldened by Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor's idea that perhaps there should be one stock exchange. They're looking at expanding, but also expanding into your space as well. And this was the back end of last year. I think it just flew under the radar for most people that Euronext was looking to become a default central securities depository for a lot of ETFs, which would encroach upon your space. Is that the wrong move?
Well, I mean, also, first of all, I'm always in favor of competition, and because Euroclear exists for more than 60 years, and competition has always been there and has always led to innovation and then to competitiveness. So I believe that the arrival in the course, if you wish, of Euronext has been a good thing because it has revived a number of, initiatives that were maybe not enough on the forefront of our strategic agenda. Now, in terms of consolidation, I think that already a lot has happened. When you look at Euroclear on the settlement side, we are managing more than 50% of the European assets. In terms of settlement volumes, is 60% on our books. So when you look at Euroclear, when you take Euroclear, Clearstream and Euronext, there more than 90% of the assets are among those three players. So consolidation has already taken place in different form, and of course we'll see how the competition unfolds. But I think at the end of the day, it's good for the markets. That
said, Euronext was talking about the motivation here, saying it aims to reduce post-trade fragmentation to boost efficiency. We were just interviewing the CEO of LSEG, who was talking about the idea too that the back infrastructure is where it could be improved. You don't necessarily need one stock exchange. It's the back end infrastructure that could be improved. Exactly what Euronext is talking about. Are there improvements to be made?
There are, and there are always improvements, and we have also been very vocal at the end of the year saying that we want to continue to develop Euroclear access to the 27 markets. We have, I think, reached quite a level of consolidation in terms of fixed income, and we want to use exactly the same recipe to some extent for also the stock markets, and continuing to work with the different stock exchanges and CCP to see how we can further improve and ease access to the 27 markets. I think Euroclear is in a unique position in the sense that, yes, we are a very strong European financial market infrastructure with the footprint I mentioned, but we also have a gateway to the world. We have really developed over the years a very strong footprint outside of Europe, which is good for Europe, because when you see the gigantic needs of financing of Europe, having, providing a clear access from non-European investors to Europe is, of course, key.
Now, I want to squeeze in a quick question on tokenization, because you and I are spending a lot of time together this week. We're on a panel talking about this. I look at what you've been up to. You've been working with partners to tokenize assets like gold, gilts, Eurobonds. There's never been more interest in alternatives than what we're seeing at the moment. So how significant could tokenization be for these assets, bringing more investors into the space?
Well, I believe that tokenization is probably the game of the future, in the sense that on one side it will allow issuers to continue to access more investors, and on the investor to have access to financial assets that today are too big for them. So I think tokenization is definitely the wave of changes that we see being positive for the capital markets, and we will continue to develop our franchise there. So yes, definitely, I think it's an end story, because the traditional finance is still is huge. We're talking about 4 trillion of digital assets, and Euroclear, we have 44 trillion of traditional finance. So it's important to see that together and to see how we can continue to bridge, traditional finance with the